a few weeks, and therefore we'll have a short hiatus, but B'ezrat Hashem, we will be back, and we look forward to that. So tonight we are looking at the great reveal in which, as the parsha begins, Yosef is still carrying out this elaborate ruse in which he is essentially testing his brothers, certainly tormenting them, albeit compared to what they did to him, I think we would agree they got off lightly. But nevertheless, it is a very anxious time for the brothers, especially no one more so than Yehuda. And he approaches Yosef, he pleads with him, perhaps beneath the surface, he threatens him as well. And the Torah says, towards the beginning of the parsha, if you look at Perek Mem Hey, at the beginning of the Perek, the beginning of chapter 45, if you're with me in the Art Scroll Stone Chumash, it's on page 252, the Torah says, V'lo yachol Yosef lis'apek l'chol hanitzavim alav. Yosef was not able to restrain himself in the presence of all the people who were there, and he said, everyone should leave. I need to be alone with these men. And the Torah says no one was with him at the time when he revealed himself to his brothers. Vayitenes kolo b'v'chi. He raised his voice in crying, and everyone heard what happened next. Vayomer Yosef in Pasukim, Vayomer Yosef elechav ani Yosef haod avi chai. Just those few words. He says to his brothers, Ani Yosef, I am your brother Joseph. He repeats it later on for emphasis and for elaboration. But initially, he simply says, Ani Yosef haod avi chai. Does my father still live? The Torah says that his brothers could not respond to him because nivhalu mipanav, they were bewildered in his presence. So all of the Mefarshim seek to appreciate and understand the nuance here. And I saw the Ksav Sofer quotes Medrash, and the Medrash says, this, as I say, dramatic moment where Yosef reveals himself to his brothers. We, the reader, are familiar. We know the background to it because the Torah makes it clear that Yosef recognizes his brothers from the start, and they do not recognize him. And with that insight, we, the readers, understand everything that follows, that the brothers are completely not just baffled, but very anxious about the treatment they're getting at the hand of this viceroy. And of course, we understand that Yosef, although the Torah doesn't spell out his intention, that Joseph is testing them, perhaps maybe you could say punishing them as I mentioned earlier, in a limited sense. But the dramatic moment of the revelation cannot be overlooked for its emotional impact and the brevity, the concise language of the Torah. Ani Yosef ha'od avichai. So the first question we can ask is, why does Yosef repeat the question, does my father still live? They have told him repeatedly that their father is alive, and in particular, when they came down to Mitzrayim the second time, Yosef asked them explicitly, is your elderly father still living? And they said, yes, he is. And of course, they stayed in Mitzrayim probably just a short time. They returned the money that they somehow mysteriously reappeared in their satchels the first time around. And as the Torah describes already in last week's parsha, they dined with Yosef. They acquired more grain. They left. And they didn't get far before they were overtaken by a representative of the palace who accused them of theft. All of this is the background. The point is that the brothers had no opportunity to get any further update. So when they told him, our father is still alive, the previous time, a short while before, there was no opportunity for status update via Facebook or WhatsApp or any other form of communication. So Yosef would have no way of reasonably expecting them to be able to provide any further information about the well-being of their father relative to the previous time. Now, it could be al derech hapshat that Yosef repeated the question because he was afraid maybe they were not telling the truth the first time around. They saw that he's interested in the father, so it suited them to say, yes, our father is still alive. if they had said our father has died, they don't know what kind of reaction that might evoke in this man, the viceroy, who has taken some kind of mysterious interest in the well-being of their father. So it is conceivable that al derech hapshat, Yosef was concerned, maybe they weren't telling me the truth previously, but now that I tell them, Ani Yosef, he's not just asking about your father, he says, Ha'od avi chai, is my father still living? That's all al derech hapshat. But the Medrash says that the statement that the brothers were bewildered and they could not respond to him because they were astonished and they were like frozen with bewilderment. The Medrash says, Amar Abba Kohen Bardala is Im Yosef Ketanan Shel Shvatim. If Joseph, the youngest of the brothers, nearly the youngest, other than Benjamin, if Yosef, who was younger than all of his brothers, lo yachlu echav, his brothers could not respond to him. They could not, they withered in the face of his tochach, of his rebuke. So certainly in the future, after 120 years, when each person is subject to the ultimate divine reckoning, then surely what response will we have? Alachas kama v'kama. Actually, the Medrash begins, Ksav Sofer doesn't quote it in full. The Medrash begins, Oy lanu miyom hadin, oy lanu miyom hatochecha. Woe to us for the day of judgment, woe to us for the day of rebuke. Because we see that Yosef, the least of the Shvatim, he was younger than everyone there, nearly except for Benjamin. And really, Benjamin wasn't the subject of his rebuke, really, because Benjamin was no party to the sale, etc. So Benjamin really had nothing to feel embarrassed about by the revelation Ani Yosef. But vis-a-vis everyone else, Yosef is the youngest, and still they had no response. So what will each person answer on the great day of judgment after 120 years? That's what the Medrash says. I'm elaborating slightly. So Ksav Sofer asks, Mazo tochacha she'ochichan kan, a very simple question. What tochacha, what rebuke do we see here? Again, Yosef initially simply says 2 words, Ani Yosef, and then he adds on 3 words, Ha'od Avichai. And after that, he seeks to appease them, to comfort them, to assuage their guilt. And if you read the verses that follow, the psukim that follow, he says, don't be ashamed and don't be worried, don't be troubled. It wasn't you who sent me here. It was the God's plan. Perhaps you intended something maybe detrimental, but Hashem intended something beneficial. Yosef does everything that he can in the few verses the Torah records to comfort them and to diminish their profound humiliation. So the Mefarshim asks, Ksav Sofer asks, what tochacha do we have? Here, yes, a person after 120 years, maybe sooner, will be rebuked, but this is not even rebuke. He answers in a way which is very compelling, and actually this same comment, with a further elaboration that I want to share with you, is also found the same approach in the Beis Halevi. The Beis Halevi was the patriarch of the great Soloveitchik dynasty. He was the father of Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, maybe the grandfather of Rav Chaim Soloveitchik. He was the father of Rav Chaim Soloveitchik. And the Soloveitchik family, which remains in our time as well, one of the great, rabbinic dynasties. So he was the first one. His name was Rav Yosef Dov Halevi Soloveitchik. And he says the following, he elaborates on the same idea. The Ksav Sofer, though, says the following. He also says it, and I'll share with you what Beis Halevi says, because he elaborates a bit further. Ksav Sofer says that the rebuke of Yosef is the following. The Medrash uses its words with great precision. Oy laneviyom hadin, the day of judgment, the day of rebuke. So the day of judgment is a person is called to account for what he did. That's judgment. Tochacha is rebuke for what he should have done. And he explains as follows. The most compelling, the most devastating rebuke is when a person is subject to scrutiny which reveals his own inconsistency. When a person proves himself to be inconsistent or maybe to be hypocritical, when a person claims a kind of defense, which perhaps could be regarded as some mitigation, but his own behavior exposes the frailty of that defense. Yosef said, Ani Yosef, I am Joseph. Ha'od avi chai, is my father still alive? The last time that we spoke, and the time before that as well, says Yosef, the first time you came, you expressed great solicitude for your father. And you said that you can't bring your brother down, your youngest brother, Vazav esaviv vames, because if he leaves his father will perish. Because this boy's older brother is no longer, and the father grieves for him exceedingly acutely. And if this younger brother is taken, the father won't survive. And Yehuda repeats it just immediately before at the beginning of this week's Parasha. Yehuda presents a heart-rending petition, Vazav esaviv vames, and you insisted we've got to bring him, and Yehuda says, I mortgaged my future, even in the next world, to my father. And navsho kshura benavsho, how can we return to our father and the youngest son is not with him? He'll perish, he'll die from despair. You took such an interest in our father. Well, I'm telling you, if you proceed to keep as a slave this young boy Benjamin, the youngest of the children, Benjamin, he was in his 20s already, but he's the youngest, then our father will never survive the despair, the shock, the grief. Says Yosef, if you are so solicitous of the pain of your father, then why didn't you think about that when you sold me into slavery? When you nearly ran me through with a sword, when you hurled me into a pit alive with snakes and scorpions, and then instead you hauled me up and sold me on to slave traders, and I ended up in Egypt. You weren't concerned with your father then, and you knew how much he loved me. You knew that I was his favorite. Obviously, the favoritism provoked the jealousy. But if you were so concerned about your father, then where was your concern when you sold me down the river? That is why the Medrash says this is the most devastating tochacha. This is the most compelling and irrefutable. Who will have a response to such a critique? That's oy lana miyamadin, oy lana miyamatoch. So the Beis HaLevi says the same thing, and he elaborates even a bit further. He says that when a person is called to account, so maybe to a certain degree, when a person is asked after 120 years why you didn't study Torah more, or why you didn't use your time to spend with your family, why didn't you use your time to do your the homework with your children, or to spend more time with your wife, or to be more motivated in household chores, all of the things that a person should do. That's just for the men, the women I'm sure as well. So a person will have, especially in the urgency of the moment, no end of explanations and excuses why he couldn't do this or that. He was busy with other things, with commitments, with obligations. And, a person will explain away why he didn't do the things that he should have done. But then in the day of judgment, if they say to him, you say you didn't have time to go to the shiur, but you found time to watch Netflix. You didn't have time to learn Chavetz Chaim, a lesson a day, but you managed to check your email or your WhatsApp messages every hour, every waking hour, maybe more than that. So if you had time for all of those diversions, why didn't you have time for the things you could have been doing? He explains that's what the expression din v'cheshbon. Din is a judgment on what you've done. You can remember the mnemonic very easily. Din is what you've done. Cheshbon, accounting, reckoning, is what you should have done with the time that you spent otherwise. Even if a person, let's say there's no transgression in checking your email, but if you do it again and again, so that it occupies so much of your time, just as an example, then you could have used that time for more productive things. Again, I'm not saying that against technology, we're using it right now at this very moment, but The point is that the din is what you've done, the cheshbon is what you could have done with that time instead. This is oy lana miyom hadin, oy lana miyom hatochecha, and this is the devastating critique, and this is why the brothers were dumbfounded, because Yosef's critique in those few words, Ani Yosef ha'od avichai, is my father still alive? How could he still be alive after what you've done to me? Let alone what the fear that you say could come to him because of Benjamin. So this is what Ksav Sofer says, and as I mentioned, it is found in Beis Halevi. Beis Halevi lived about a generation later, actually, not that much after, maybe 2 generations after Ksav Sofer. Whether he saw it in the Ksav Sofer, I don't know. But in any case, Beis Halevi says the same idea, I think, very compelling idea. I want to share with you another insight of Ksav Sofer regarding a pasuk that appears just a little bit further on in the same chapter. So turn the page with me and look at pasuk Tesvav. So Yosef reveals himself to his brothers. He comforts them, and he tells them, "Go back to Canaan. Tell our father that I am here, that I'm the viceroy. The famine is devastating in the whole region. Come to Mitzrayim, and I will look after you. Tell them about Kol Kvodi b'Mitzrayim, all of the honor that I've achieved in Egypt." And the Torah says in Pasuk Tesvav, verse 15, "Vayinashek l'chol echav vayevk aleihem." He kisses all of his brothers and he cries upon them, each one, maybe one by one. And then after all of that, finally they spoke to him. After they were comforted, after they were appeased, after they regained some composure, after they saw that Yosef evidently does not bear them any malice, as he said explicitly, and he demonstrated by embracing them, crying. It's interesting, though, the brothers didn't cry. It doesn't say that the brothers cried. It says, Vayevk aleihem. He kissed each of them and he cried upon them. Says the Ksav Sofer, a very interesting medrash. This medrash I was not previously familiar with. The medrash says as follows. You've got to listen to it and hear the interpretation. The medrash says, "Kishem shelo pies Yosef le'achav ele bevechia." Just as Yosef only appeased and comforted and revived his brothers and enabled them to regain some composure and some standing, some stature, some self-confidence to respond to him or to talk to him, he did it through crying. That's what the Torah says. Va'achar immediately in that, the rest of that pasuk, va'acharei chen, in pasuk Tesvav, verse 3, va'acharei chen dibru echavito. After that, his brothers were able to speak to him. So says the Medrash. Only through tears. Cain Eino Goel es Yisrael. The Almighty will redeem the Jewish people through tears. Diksiv, as the pasuk says, it's a verse in Yirmiyah, in Jeremiah. Bevechi yavo v'sachanunim ovilam. With tears will they come, and with supplications will I bring them. This is a vision of the end of days, the ultimate redemption, and the pasuk says that there will be tears at that time. I will bring them with tears. And the Mefarshim try to explain the significance of that. Yosef's tears, the tears of the Jewish people in the future. What's the common feature? Says the Ksav Sofer as follows. There's a pasuk in Tehillim, which we're familiar with because we say it every Shabbos. Samchenu kiemos inisanu. Cause us to rejoice in accordance with the days of our affliction. That in accordance with the many days, which would be many centuries of persecution and affliction, cause us to rejoice in a similar measure. Shnos ra'inu ra'a, in accordance with the years when we saw misfortune. Samchenu kimos inisanu shnos ra'inu ra'a. So says the Ksav Sofer. He said, I elsewhere explained that pasuk as follows, that, the exile has been so long and so onerous, so acute, so severe, so bitter. How have we survived? Now, I would say that I believe I'm speaking to people whose experiences in the current galus are broadly similar to mine, which really is not that bad. I mean, chas v'shalom, none of us should ever confront the kind of persecution that our ancestors, even recent ancestors, endured in so many times in so many places. So probably we are living in a gilded exile compared to the experience of our forebears over the course of many centuries. But historically, and as you may know, I have an interest in Jewish history. I'm a student of Jewish history, and I can well understand, which Ksav Sofer suggests here, that the Jewish people our tears ran dry in the course of the exile. If we cried in accordance with every pogrom, every massacre, every form of persecution, every torment, every exploitation, every instance of forced conversion, every blood libel, every experience of grief and torment that the Jewish people have endured in our history, we would have no tears left in our tear ducts, and therefore ineluctably we have, as the Jewish people collectively and nationally, have dried our tears. We can't reflect. And by the way, I have seen this myself in Holocaust survivors. In fact, you probably are aware in the 1950s, it was before my time, in the 50s and 60s, 70s, even the 80s, it was uncommon for Holocaust survivors to speak or to write about the Holocaust. Many people, many Holocaust survivors, even among their friends and family, did not dwell on those years. It was certainly not the norm to speak at public gatherings and schools. Nowadays, many Holocaust survivors in this country and elsewhere, they frequently speak publicly to school children, to older children, and elsewhere. But for a long time, they never did. And part of the reason, partly because people weren't interested in what they had to say, but partly they were unable to focus upon it. They could only survive by looking forward, not by looking backwards. Ksav Sofer says something similar. He says that the long exile has been so bitter that we haven't even been able to grieve because of the exile. We've become inured to it. But when the Geula arrives, when the redemption is finally at hand, he says, B'v'chi yavo, then we will cry, because then we will have the tears of joy, but the tears of joy will be also like supplemented by the tears of grief. We will finally reflect on the long and bitter exile. He says that is the meaning when it says that just as Yosef revealed himself to his brothers and comforted his brothers only with tears, the same will be in the future. Because the tears of joy will be mingled with the tears of grief when we finally reflect on the long, tortuous journey through exile. When we are able to have the confidence and the self-composure to actually reflect then on the bitter exile, and therefore we will have two sets of tears. He says that's why Yosef cried at this time. He says that Yosef, he mentions that Yosef himself also was unable to reflect extensively on the days of trauma, the trauma of the hatred of his brothers, of being thrust into the pit at the age of 17, of being hauled up by his own brothers and sold into slavery, besides all the travail that he encountered in Egypt. Yosef himself was unable to reflect upon it, and that is explicit in the Torah. I'm sure you remember in last week's Parsha when he was married and now he's the viceroy and he fathers a son. What name does he give to his firstborn? He calls him Menashe. Do you remember why? The name Menashe. He says, the Torah itself says explicitly, Ki nashani Elokim, because God has caused me to forget my travail in my father's house. Nashani means to forget. Nashani Elokim. Hashem has caused me or enabled me to forget. And you have to wonder, why is Yosef almost like taking pride in the fact that he's forgotten his father's household? The answer is that Yosef said, I'm finally able to draw a line under my past. I've been able to move on, because as long as a person is laboring under the heavy burden of the suffering, of the despair, if a person wallows in self-pity, and if he can't escape the memories of the horrors he has undergone, it can hold him down, it can hold him back, it can prevent him from living his life. And as I say, this was the experience of many Holocaust survivors. If they had reflected too much and too deeply and regularly and shared with others their experiences, it could have overwhelmed them. And Yosef, says Ksav Sofer, is the same way. In order to move on in life, he couldn't focus, he couldn't contemplate deeply and extensively the suffering that he underwent. But now that he finally reveals himself to his brothers and he reconciles himself with his brothers, now he's able to cry tears of joy at the reconciliation, but he's also now able to cry tears in reflecting on the suffering that he underwent as well. This is what the Medrash means when it says that just as Yosef needed to cry, in the future we will cry as well. Of course, tears of joy, but also we will then be able to reflect, to cry the tears for the suffering of the bitter exile as well. So Ksav Sofer says that the reunion reawakens in him those bitter memories, but it also enabled him to contend with it and to deal with it. What about the brothers? So Ksav Sofer observed his brothers didn't cry. The pasuk says, take another look in pasuk Tesvav, verse 15. Vayinashek l'cholecha vayevk aleihem. He cried upon them. It doesn't say they cried. So they didn't cry partly because they were bewildered, but now after he has consoled them more extensively, etc., they are able to speak to him, and they still don't cry. Ksav Sofer says something very interesting. Yosef did not cry anymore for the suffering that he endured. As I said, he needed to draw a line under it in order to move on. In a similar way, the Jewish people, we won't be able to cry, we won't be able to focus on all of the travail and the suffering of 2,000 years and more. But when the redemption finally arrives, then we can. What about the brothers? So according to this analogy, says Ksav Sofer an interesting observation. Yosef was not crying over all the years because of what happened to him. He moved on from it. What about the brothers? So in last week's Parsha, the Torah says when Yosef invited them to dine with him, it says, Vayishtu vayishakru imo, that Vayishkaru imo, they ate and they drank and they became intoxicated with him. Rashi says, why does the Torah say they drank to intoxication? Doesn't necessarily mean they all became drunk, but it means, says Rashi, that from the time of Yosef's sale, especially when they saw the grief, the inconsolable grief that their father endured, they did not drink wine. They observed an element of avelus themselves for what they did to their brother. They were in a continuous state of regret. And of course, it was too late. Of course, Rashi mentions when they did go down to Egypt, they went down to buy grain, but they also thought maybe this is a chance to see if we can find Joseph. He's still alive, if we can ransom him. That's why they looked around for him that way. They didn't find him till he found them, or maybe they found him without realizing it. So says Ksav Sofer, the brothers didn't cry because they had been mourning all along. Therefore, when they saw Yosef, they didn't cry anymore. On the contrary, they had only the joy. But of course, initially, they probably did not cry because of the deep humiliation and the self-consciousness. If a person is self-conscious, he's not able to cry. If he feels people are looking at him, and they felt so self-conscious that they were not able to cry, and the Torah doesn't say that they cried. Probably they felt after the profound humiliation and shame, they must have felt an enormous sense of relief. In a way, their own crime has been expiated because Yosef does not bear them any malice, and they are reconciled finally with their brother as well. So these are my thoughts for this evening. Thank you for joining us. Again, we'll have a little hiatus now during the winter recess.